Good morning. Good morning. This is the last half hour that you're going to have to spend here. How many would you like to stay? Anybody would like to stay here all day? You would? Do you like to work here?
No.
Maybe?
I like working.
You think you could do the video?
No.
That's very easy. You just turn it on, turn it off. And then ask you questions.
Answer questions and act like you know what you're talking about.
Back in the 1820s, even earlier than that, there were different trades and there were apprentices. Now, a tradesman was the actual person who owned the business that had a trade of making things. And an apprentice was who? He was the helper or the learner. Okay? Now, Donald Trump had a program on TV. He was the tradesman. Everybody that was on the program was the apprentice. And he had fun firing everybody. That was his big deal. Which kind of scares you now that he's probably the presidential candidate for the Republicans. And what's he going to do if he does become president? He's going to fire everybody. But back in those days, if you happen to have a skillet like this at home, this is called a spider skillet, because what do the legs look like? Spider legs. If you had one of these nowadays and this leg broke off right here, what would you probably do with this? Pitch it, throw it away.
Bring up the other legs.
Back in the 1800s, or even earlier, if something broke off like the leg, you would take it to the blacksmith and he would repair it. Anything that was made out of metal back then that was iron or metal like this could be fixed by the blacksmith. And he actually had a business or a trade of repairing or even making things from scratch. And that was his trade. He could repair a spider skillet. If there was a hole in the bottom of this, he could actually take a piece of metal and hammer it and make a new skillet out of a piece of plain metal. Now, what did he have to do to this to do that?
Heat it up.
Heat it up, take a hammer, and hit it. Guess what smith means? Earlier word for smith was smith. Guess what that meant? Hammering metal. So he was called a blacksmith because he's hammering metal to repair things. Now, the reason it was black because everything he did with the forge turned out being what color?
Black.
Black. All the metal would turn black. So he was a blacksmith. He was making metal that was black and he hammered it. That's the way he did it. Now, if you went to school at home, or if there's a chance you actually had schools, by the time you were 11 or 12, you probably knew how to write, you probably knew how to read, and you probably knew how to do math. If you could do all three of those things good, you were done with school. So just imagine. You could have been done with school like 3 or 4 years ago. You guys have been out of school a long time ago. Now, if you finished school and you know how to do all that, you had to know how to read to know what the local news was. You had to know how to do math, so if you bought something, the storekeeper couldn't rip you off and shortchange you. And you had to know how to write your name in case you had to sign something. Once you learn how to do all those three things, you were done with school. Now, what you do then is you become an apprentice and learn how to do a trade. Because if you knew a trade, you could make a living and make money. So by the time you were 11 or 12, you probably mastered math, hopefully. And you probably knew how to write, you probably knew how to read. So your dad, stand up here. He's going to walk you down the street to the other side of town and introduce you to the blacksmith. Okay, stand right here by me. Okay, walk with me. Okay, here we are at the blacksmith shop. Mr. Blacksmith, could she become an apprentice for the blacksmith shop? Now, what was the chances of that happening back in the early days? No, because girls usually didn't get a job doing a trade. You might do sewing, or you might be a seamstress or something like that, but just pretend that you could. First thing the blacksmith would say, let me see how many muscles you got. Put your arm up here. Put your arm up here. Wow. You're hired. You look like you're pretty strong. So he would have your father sign a contract that you're going to work for the next 3 or 4 years as an apprentice and learn to be a blacksmith. So you're going to get a place to sleep, food to eat, and you're going to work from sun up to sundown doing jobs around the blacksmith shop. Okay? Basically shoveling coal and coke and firing up the forge and hauling away the ashes, all kinds of work like that. Eventually he'd let you make 1,000 nails for somebody, heat up a rod, hammer it to a point, cut it off, put it in a hole, and hammer the top of it into a head of a nail. And whenever you get 1,000 of them done, that job's finished and set you to work on another job. But after 3 or 4 years, you learn how to do basically the repair work, how to make things out of metal, and you would be a blacksmith. So your dad would sign that, you'd start working for the next 3 or 4 years. When you finally knew enough information to be a blacksmith, you were basically graduating from college back in those days. Most people, their extended education was learning how to do something for a living. Nowadays, you go to college to learn how to be a teacher. Okay? For how many years? 4? Boy, you're lucky. A lot of people take 5 or 6 years to do it because they've added so much more onto it than when I did it. But you would be able to go out and start a blacksmith shop. Only problem is the bottom of that contract that her father signed, there was fine print. It says once you learn how to be a blacksmith and you want to open up a shop, you can't do it in this town. You got to go out west somewhere and set up a new blacksmith shop in a town that doesn't have one. So you might as well have your traveling shoes on. You might as well get ready to move. Take a river boat or something up the Missouri River out to Kansas somewhere, start a blacksmith shop there, because they wouldn't allow you to do it here. Sound like fun? No. Okay, you can sit back down. Almost sounds like you're being sold into indenturement or something. Basically, it's a contract. It's being signed, and you're on that job for 3 or 4 years before you're going to be able to move on. And they're going to say, "Get out of here, move on." Now, that was a blacksmith. Somebody who worked with tin was called a what? A tinsmith. Somebody who worked with copper, coppersmith. You had to hammer the copper to make these round shapes for like this dome on this lid. So that was a coppersmith. Somebody who worked with silver, silversmith. Who was a famous silversmith that was from Boston? One light, 2 lights from the church steeple. He rode on his horse. Paul Revere. I had to give you guys a lot of clues to know that. He was a silversmith. Okay. Somebody who got really, really good at being a blacksmith might advance into being a gunsmith. Because most of the metal parts on this gun had to be hammered. So this is a gun, and it's a smith because he had to hammer the different parts. The cover down here, the trigger here, the barrel, all the metal parts had to be hammered. So that was a gunsmith. Who do you think made more money, a blacksmith or a gunsmith? Gunsmith. Gunsmith. That's why this blacksmith switched from being a blacksmith to being a gunsmith, because he could make a lot more money doing that. If you worked with cow horn, you were called a what? It wasn't a horn. It wasn't a hornsmith. If I took a hammer and hit this horn, what would happen to it? It'd shatter. You'd break it. So it wasn't. It was just called. Person who worked with horn was called a horner. Okay, basically he was a horner. Now, does this spoon look like it's made out of? What's it look like it's made out of?
Plastic.
Plastic. What's this comb look like it's made out of?
Plastic.
What's this cup look like?
Plastic.
Plastic. Guess what all three of those are?
Horn.
Horn. You could actually take cow horn, cut it up if you were an apprentice into slabs, heat it in an oven, take that soft horn, put it between 2 blocks of wood, let it cool, and it would stay flat. And then one of your jobs, tedious jobs like making nails, would be to cut every one of those little grooves with a little saw to make it into a comb, so you could comb your hair. Okay? So that it looks like plastic that was made out of horn. They could actually take a cow horn and fashion it into a, what's this called? Called a powder horn. Okay? You could put a stopple or a plug down here, and on the small end put a stopper into the end down here. That's where you take it out and pour the powder into a measure. Then you take the measure and pour it into the barrel. You don't want to just take the horn like on TV and pour it in there. If you got too much in there, guess what happened? The barrel will blow up in your face. So there's a correct way of loading a muzzle loader. You made things out of clay, you were called a potter. It wasn't Potter Smith. If you took a hammer and started hitting clay, you wouldn't have any products to sell. Now there's an interesting thing about this pottery. If you're a good potter and you use your brain, this weighs about 20 or 25 pounds, about 20. If I fill this up with vinegar or cider, it holds about almost 3 gallons. So, 3 gallons, how many pounds is a gallon? Anybody know? 8 pounds. 8 pounds times 3 is 24. This weighs 20. 44 pounds. If I told a 5-year-old to go down in the cellar and get a jug of cider, they wouldn't be able to lift it and carry it up. It's too much weight for a little kid. So this potter said, hey, I can make 2 handles on one of these big jugs. And then one kid can carry one side, the other one grab this side. Now you just took the amount of weight it was and you divided it by 2. So it makes it easier for them to carry it. A lot of people like that, and they bought a lot of these jugs with the 2 handles. Whenever you go into a store and you see a small one, you'd say, hey, that's Joe the Potter's pottery. It's got 2 handles on it. Anything with 2 handles all of a sudden became a what? Think for a second. He was a tradesman. He put 2 handles on most of his jugs, so that became his trademark. That became his trademark. 2-handle jugs was his trademark. People recognize that and they buy his products because he was a local businessman. Somebody else came into town and started trying to sell jugs, and they only had 1 handle on them, like this one. So nobody's buying my jugs because they only got 1 handle. And if I start putting 2 handles on it, then other potters could probably come and burn my pottery shop down because I'm stealing his idea. So what did they do? They started putting designs on it to make them look kind of neat. People started buying these and set them on the shelf because they were nice to look at. So all of a sudden he started selling pottery. So now they could both live together. He could sell his 2-handled pots, jugs, and this guy could sell his. So it was an opportunity for 2 people to have a pottery in the same town. Usually you wanted to monopolize the business, so there was usually only one pottery per town. Because you didn't want 2 or 3 people trying to do the same thing, because you want to be able to make a living. Too much competition.
Yeah.
If you made things out of glass, what was this called? It's glass that you would, glass blower. Now, you can tell early glass from modern glass, because on the bottom there's usually a depression, and there's a scar right there where the rod to hold this, so you could finish the top of it, shape it. If you broke off, you'd have a ponto mark there. So anything that's old like this bottle, or like this bowl right here, if you look at the bottom, guess what's on there? There's a ponto mark on there, where that rod was stuck to it, and it was finished on top, they'd snap that off. Now everybody sitting here has a ponto mark. Because when you were born, you had a cord attached to your mother and your stomach, and they cut that off, and you ended up having a ponto mark right here on your stomach. But you don't call it a ponto mark. Got a better name for it. Belly button or navel. Okay? So it's kind of the same thing. So that was called a glass blower. Somebody who worked with wood and made barrels or containers was called a cooper. Now you're thinking, wait a minute, you're working with wood and you're making a container, how do you get cooper? I thought cooper was somebody who worked with copper. Copper, cooper? No, that doesn't work. This person here made individual staves, put them all together, put bands around it, and when this would get wet, what would happen to that wood? It would swell, it would make it waterproof. Well, this is small, like canteen, has a stopper right there. You could put water in this. Most of the time it wasn't water. Okay. But you could drink out of that hole right there, then put the stopper back in it, and that would keep the liquid inside. Somebody who worked with carving wood was a wood carver. Spoons, forks, bowls, different things made out of wood, you were a wood carver. Somebody who made baskets, basket weaver. Okay, you could take this and pick strawberries and put them in here. This is actually a little berry basket. If you had a bigger basket with a handle on it, you could use it to gather eggs. If you went out in the woods, you could find pawpaw trees. You could pick up pawpaws and put them in the basket. Okay? Anybody know what a pawpaw is? It's kind of a fruit that looks sort of like a weird shaped pear. But when they're green, they're not too tasty. Once they start turning black, they're riper, and you can actually eat them like bananas. Because that's what they taste like. Bananas. And they grow around here. Okay? Now, how many of you eat black bananas? They're too ripe. Pawpaws are delicious when they turn black. And usually there's pawpaws all over the place out in the woods by creeks. Those deer will eat them. They'll swallow the seeds, and when they walk around different places in the woods, they would actually plant more seeds. What are you laughing about? But that was a basket weaver. Somebody who just weaves wool is called a weaver. Okay? They'd have a loom, they would weave sashes, or they could weave sashes like this. They weave blankets like this. And this blanket is not very wide. Because guess what? The looms are only about how big? About this wide. That's about how much you could weave on a loom. If you want a bigger blanket, what would you have to do? Weave 2 of these and then stitch them together to make a bigger blanket. That's how you usually got bigger blankets, by stitching two halves together to make a whole. Okay? If you made chairs, you were called a chair maker. In the video, there was a gentleman with a beard, and he was sitting on a shaving horse, and he had a draw knife, and he was shaving down the spindles to go on one of these chairs. He was actually making all those parts so he could make a chair out of them. And he was a chair maker. I think when you watch the video, did anybody talk to you about unnecessary? Place to go to the bathroom outside?
Oh.
Okay, that's that brick building, that little one right there. That was unnecessary. Has two doors. Behind each door is a small seat with a hole and a larger seat with a larger hole. And you can use either side. When you gotta go, you gotta go. So if one door was closed and locked, you could use the other side. Because they didn't label them boys and girls. They were just unisex. You could use either side. That's going to become more common nowadays. Okay? You can use either side for whatever. But there was a really crappy trade or job that somebody had. When a brick necessary like that got full, somebody had to clean it out with a mule team and a wagon. They would have to dip everything out of there, either reaching down in there with a bucket and pour it in the wagon or whatever. Now remember, I said that was a crappy job. Because one of the names for necessary besides necessary was a privy or a John. Nowadays you have porta johns and Johnny on the spot. Schools have restrooms, homes have bathrooms. Back then there's another name for it. It was called the crapper. And if you had to clean them out, you couldn't very often get an apprentice for that particular trade. Nobody really wanted to learn how to do that to make money. But you know, when you actually compare how much some of these people made with how much that person got paid to clean that out, that was actually a very lucrative job. Because you had to hunt all over the place, maybe look in the Spectator, which was a local paper, to find a honey dipper. No, they didn't call them honey dippers because it was a sweet job. That was just a nicer name for it. Okay? But there weren't too many people. There weren't too many people that had that trade, and there weren't too many people you could actually get to be an apprentice for that particular job. So you didn't have a lot of competition. Okay? If it was brick, could you dig two new pits and move that building over on top of the two new ones? Couldn't do that. A lot of people have wooden privies where you could actually, when it got full, you could dig a new hole and move the whole thing over because it's made out of wood. But a two-door brick privy couldn't be moved. George Washington had a brick privy at Mount Vernon where he lived out east. And he had about 4 or 5 door privy. So that was probably, you had to pay more for somebody to come and clean that out. Because you had 5 separate stalls that had to be cleaned out. So what a way to finish the discussion about tradesmen than with the best job possible.